Imagine betting a world war on an airplane that hadn't even proven it could fly. In 1944, America began rolling B-29 Superfortresses off the line before the blueprints were finished. An aircraft so ambitious, it was called the costliest gamble in U.S. aviation, and for a while, it looked like it might never leave the factory. This is the untold race to build the B-29, the wager that would turn the sky into a weapon and decide a war. In 1941, long before America officially entered World War II, General Henry Hap Arnold made a chilling prediction. The nation most likely to win would not just have the largest air force at the start, but the ability to keep producing overwhelming numbers of men and machines. His vision demanded more than fighters or short-range bombers. It required something entirely new, a weapon that could strike any enemy, anywhere in the world, and return safely. From this idea was born the B-29 Superfortress. Bigger than any bomber that came before it, the B-29 was designed to do what seemed impossible: carry a massive payload thousands of miles across the Pacific and devastate the Japanese homeland. But this wasn't just a bold step forward in aviation. It was a gamble of staggering proportions. The U.S. government poured billions into a plane so advanced that no one knew if it could even be built on time, let alone survive in combat. Critics called it reckless. Supporters called it visionary. But one fact was undeniable. America was wagering its future in the Pacific on a flying fortress that, in 1941, still existed only on paper. Everything changed on December 7th, 1941. When Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor, America lost more than ships and lives. It lost nearly 350 of the 525 combat aircraft stationed in the Pacific. In a single morning, a quarter of America's striking power vanished. Suddenly, Hap Arnold's prophecy wasn't just theory. It was reality. President Roosevelt responded with a demand that sounded almost impossible. The United States would build 50,000 planes a year, even though in 1939 the nation had produced fewer than 6,000 video transcript. Factories that once made cars, refrigerators, or even farm tools were ordered to churn out war machines instead. In Europe, America could bomb Germany from bases in England. But the Pacific was different. Distances were vast, oceans stretched for thousands of miles, and Japan's homeland lay far beyond the reach of existing bombers. The U.S. didn't just need more planes, it needed a new kind of plane. A bomber with unprecedented range, speed, and payload capacity. And so, the dream of the B-29 became a matter of survival. It was no longer just an ambitious project. It was the only way America could hope to strike Japan itself. As America scrambled to catch up, the question became, who would build this super bomber? Major companies hesitated. Douglas, already burned by costly overruns, submitted a half-hearted design. Lockheed, still a young firm, lacked the capacity. Most aviation giants saw the project as a financial death trap. But Boeing, though nearly bankrupt after the B-17, took the risk. They gambled everything on a design that dwarfed anything in the skies. With a wingspan of over 140 feet and 4 engines producing more than 2,000 horsepower each, the B-29 promised to push aviation into a new era. The gamble wasn't just technical, it was financial and political. For the first time in history, the U.S. government ordered mass production before the prototype had even flown. Entire assembly lines began cranking out bombers still plagued with design flaws. Engineers worked day and night, rewriting blueprints as factories riveted metal to wing and fuselage. It was a race against time and against doubt. To the skeptics, this was madness. To the believers, it was America's best shot at ending the war on its own terms. Either way, the B-29 was no longer just a plane. It was the centerpiece of the nation's greatest gamble. To build the B-29, America needed more than blueprints and engines. It needed an army of workers. The government chose Wichita, Kansas, as the program's beating heart. Why Wichita? It was far from vulnerable coasts, had a small immigrant population that officials believed would reduce the risk of labor unrest, and sat in the middle of the nation, safe and secure. Almost overnight, Wichita transformed into a city of war. Farmers traded plows for rivet guns. Housewives who had never worked outside the home learned to assemble wings, wire cockpits, and install engines. Even grandmothers who just years earlier had only tended wood stoves were now building parts of the world's most advanced bomber. By 1944, over 60% of every superfortress was being built in Wichita. The city became a symbol of American industrial might. Ordinary people producing extraordinary machines. Assembly lines stretched across the plains, echoing the rhythm of war. And yet, behind the optimism, every rivet carried the weight of uncertainty. Because no matter how many planes rolled out of Wichita's factories, no one knew if the B-29 could actually deliver in combat. The B-29 wasn't just another bomber. It was the most advanced aircraft of its era. Pressurized cabins for high-altitude missions, remote-controlled gun turrets, and a massive payload capacity. On paper, it was revolutionary. In reality, it was a nightmare. The engines were powerful, but dangerously unreliable. Fires broke out mid-air, sometimes consuming entire wings before crews could react. Maintenance crews struggled to keep up as new defects appeared faster than old ones could be fixed. Pilots whispered that the B-29 was as likely to kill its crew as it was the enemy. Engineers called it a plane built in reverse. Factories were assembling parts before the design was even finalized. Critical sections were redesigned while production was already underway, leading to chaotic fixes and constant delays. For months, the Superfortress looked like a failure in the making. Billions of dollars and years of work had gone into a bomber that couldn't stay in the air long enough to fight. And yet, America couldn't turn back. Too much money, too much pride, and too much of the war effort were already invested. The gamble had to be played out to the end. By mid-1944, the B-29 finally reached the battlefield, but not in the way its designers imagined. President Roosevelt approved Operation Matterhorn, a daring plan to bomb Japan from airfields in China. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it was one of the most grueling logistical challenges of the war. Every gallon of fuel, every bomb, and every spare part had to be flown over the Himalayas, the infamous hump, through brutal weather and enemy territory. Crews called it the most dangerous supply route in the world. For each combat mission, dozens of transport flights were needed just to deliver the fuel and bombs a single B-29 required. When the bombers finally reached Japan, the results were mixed. Some missions hit their targets and showed the Superfortress's raw potential. But mechanical breakdowns, engine fires, and staggering fuel costs left many wondering if the gamble had failed. Critics whispered that the B-29 was too ambitious, too flawed, and too late. But America wasn't done. The true test of the Superfortress, and the gamble behind it, was still to come. The turning point came when General Curtis LeMay took command of the B-29 campaign. Known for his ruthless efficiency, LeMay scrapped the high-altitude precision bombing that plagued the Superfortress and ordered something far more brutal: low-altitude night raids with incendiaries. In March 1945, hundreds of B-29s roared over Tokyo at just 5,000 feet, dropping firebombs that turned the city into a sea of flames. The results were devastating. 16 square miles of the capital destroyed, more than 100,000 people killed in a single night. It was the deadliest air raid in history, more lethal than even the atomic bombings that would follow. For the first time, the gamble began to pay off. The B-29, once plagued with failures, had become America's weapon of annihilation. One by one, Japan's industrial centers were reduced to ashes: Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe. The Superfortress was no longer a troubled experiment. It was the sledgehammer breaking Japan's ability to wage war. And yet, even after these firestorms, the B-29 still had one final mission that would define its place in history forever. By the summer of 1945, Japan was reeling, its cities in ruins, its factories destroyed. Yet its leaders refused to surrender. That's when the B-29 was chosen for the most consequential mission in human history. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay lifted off with a single, untested weapon, the atomic bomb Little Boy. Hours later, Hiroshima was obliterated in a blinding flash. 3 days later, another B-29, Boxcar, carried Fat Man to Nagasaki. In 2 missions, the gamble of the Superfortress ended not just a war, but an era. The B-29 had begun as an experiment so risky, it nearly bankrupted Boeing and embarrassed the US military. But in the end, it became the aircraft that forced Japan's surrender and reshaped global history. For its crews, the Superfortress was both a miracle and a monster. An airplane that tested their courage, burned their hands with fire, and carried weapons beyond imagination. For the world, it was the machine that ended the bloodiest conflict in history. The B-29 Superfortress was more than just a bomber. It was a symbol of America's willingness to gamble everything on innovation. What began as a risky blueprint became the aircraft that carried the war across the Pacific, burned Tokyo to the ground, and delivered the atomic bombs that forced Japan's surrender. Its legacy stretched far beyond 1945. The B-29 introduced technologies, pressurized cabins, remote gun turrets, advanced navigation that became standard in aviation. It trained a generation of engineers and pilots who would later design the jets of the Cold War, and it proved that industrial mobilization, when fueled by urgency and national will, could achieve the impossible. Yet its story remains bittersweet. For all its triumphs, the B-29 was also the harbinger of modern warfare's darkest chapter, the dawn of nuclear destruction. It showed the world that the sky itself could be turned into a battlefield, and that wars could end not through battles won, but through devastation unleashed. In the end, the Superfortress stands as both America's greatest gamble and its greatest victory. A machine born from desperation, built by ordinary hands in extraordinary times, and remembered forever as the plane that changed history.